Hey guys, tonight we step right into the warm amber glow of an Edwardian home. You picture yourself settling into a cozy parlor, shadows dancing on patterned wallpaper, the family gathered close as the night stretches on. It feels safe, even charming, doesn't it? Yet, here's the first cheeky reality check. You probably won't survive this room. That soft golden halo above your head is a gas lamp, and while it's filling the space with light, it's also quietly filling your lungs with poison. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing the little constellation of night owls who tune in across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a few steps deeper into the Edwardian home. The hiss of gas mantles overhead feels almost alive, like a breathing creature tucked into the fixtures. The Edwardians had traded in the flickering mess of candles for this miracle of science. Just one twist of a valve, and suddenly entire parlors lit up with an intensity unknown to previous generations. You can almost hear the sigh of relief. No more trimming candle wicks, no more sooty residue smudging ceilings. But the air smells faintly metallic, sharp, almost sweet. You notice how your chest feels heavier with each breath, and it's no accident. That's carbon monoxide creeping quietly into every corner. Mainstream historians often describe the Gaslight era as a golden bridge between Victorian gloom and electric modernity. It was modern, fashionable, even glamorous. Whole streets lit up with a dazzling brilliance that made Edwardian cities feel alive at night, buzzing with possibility. But in homes, the story grew murkier. Families would often wake up dizzy, nauseous, or simply not wake up at all. Doctors at the time coined the phrase gas apoplexy for sudden collapses in well-lit rooms. You imagine dropping your teacup, the china shattering against the carpet, as your body sags under the invisible weight of poisoned air. Here's the quirky bit. Despite the danger, people adored Gaslight so much that they even fitted lamps in bathrooms and bedrooms. Can you picture drifting off to sleep with a steady flame hissing just feet away from your face? Some Edwardian advertisements even bragged about night-long safety light for children's nurseries. Safety, yes, except for the part where the tiniest leak might choke the entire household before dawn. Historians still argue whether families of the time truly understood the risks, or whether they chose willful ignorance because the beauty of light outweighed fear. It's a classic human dilemma. The thrill of progress usually blinds us to its teeth. You sit back into a chair beneath the lamp, feeling the warmth radiate above you. The glass globe rattles faintly whenever a breeze nudges the window. Imagine yourself there, your lungs drawing in, your pulse slightly off rhythm. Some nights, families mistook headaches and fatigue for just bad air or winter chill. They opened a window, blamed damp weather, and carried on, never realizing their beloved fixture was slowly rewiring their blood chemistry. But there's more. Gas wasn't only killing invisibly, it also had a talent for exploding. Early fixtures leaked constantly. Valves wore down, pipes cracked, and no one noticed until someone struck a match. One wrong spark, and suddenly the cozy parlor became a roaring inferno. Picture this: an Edwardian gentleman trying to impress guests lights his cigar, only for the entire mantle above to catch with a terrifying whoosh. Families described wallpaper peeling like curling parchment, flames licking up curtains in seconds. It wasn't uncommon for entire townhouses to vanish in an evening, reduced to smoldering heaps. And still, Edwardians carried on. Why? Because light meant prestige. If you walked your friends into a home dimly lit by oil lamps, you were old-fashioned. But if they stepped into a brilliantly glowing room, you were modern, worldly, a proper participant in the new century. It's the same logic that gets us today. Yes, your shiny new smartphone might overhear everything you say, but heaven forbid you be the last one in your circle without one. Now let's pull closer into the sensory details. The room smells faintly of varnished wood and the sweet sting of coal gas. You hear the hiss, a constant whisper that seems like a lullaby until you remember it's deadly. The shadows on the wall dance in strange patterns, half romantic, half menacing. Children sit cross-legged on the rug, tracing their fingers over picture books, blissfully unaware their tiny lungs are more vulnerable to the fumes than their parents. Upstairs, a grandmother coughs herself to sleep, the household assuming it's just age catching up. Doctors debated endlessly. Was gas poisoning a direct killer, or did it simply weaken people so much that other illnesses, pneumonia, influenza, could swoop in? You might think of it as the Edwardian equivalent of passive smoking, not instantly fatal every time, but a steady toll on vitality. Some physicians even prescribed moving out of gaslit homes for nervous conditions. And yet, because the gas company had such strong influence, the risks were often downplayed. Sound familiar? Here's a fringe tidbit. People used canaries not just in coal mines, but sometimes in homes too. A small bird in a cage acted as a silent alarm. If the canary keeled over, it was time to open the windows wide. Imagine explaining that to a guest. Don't mind the bird, it's just our family's survival system. You glance up again at the gas mantle. Have you noticed how fragile it looks? That delicate mesh glowing white-hot was made of rare earth salts, specifically thorium, which, plot twist, was slightly radioactive. Yes, Edwardians unknowingly filled their rooms not only with poisonous fumes, but also with a faint tickle of radiation. Historians still argue whether the doses were significant enough to matter, but it adds another layer of irony. In chasing brightness, they literally irradiated their parlors. And here's the cruelest part. The glow was mesmerizing. Writers of the time waxed poetic about how gaslight made people's skin look warmer, gave fabrics a richer hue, softened the atmosphere in a way no candle ever could. Lovers met under gaslight. Families celebrated birthdays beneath its golden haze. Shopkeepers used it to lure customers with windows that finally sparkled at night. You can imagine yourself leaning into a mirror, your face bathed in that same flattering glow, never realizing the cost hidden behind the charm. Night deepens outside the Edwardian house, but the interior pulses with false day. You lean back, listening to the tick of a mantel clock, lulled by the hum of invisible danger. A neighbor across the way snores, but their lamp hasn't been extinguished properly. A faint hiss fills the room until morning, when they are found still in their beds, never having stirred. Local newspapers call it sleeping death, and they print it alongside advertisements urging more families to install gaslight. And that perhaps is the most Edwardian paradox of all. Survival hinged on rituals. Families learned to open transoms above doors, to leave windows cracked even in freezing weather, to double-check valves before sleep. Some even paid children to crawl along the floor with soapy water, brushing it on joints of pipes to check for bubbling leaks. You imagine crouching there, suds dripping from your fingers, praying the air doesn't suddenly ignite. But here you are, still sitting under the glow, watching shadows flicker, realizing how thin the line between luxury and lethal really was. You might even whisper to yourself, progress always comes with a price tag. We just rarely know it until it's too late. You're still in that same Edwardian home, and your eyes drift from the glowing gas mantle to the walls that surround you. At first glance, they look spectacular. Lush green vines curling upward, peacock feathers fanning out, perhaps even cherubs frolicking in soft pink skis. The patterns are vivid, almost glowing, as if someone had pressed the entire Garden of Eden between four walls. It feels alive, rich, endlessly fashionable. Yet there's that uneasy truth again. You probably won't survive this either. Because in Edwardian houses, the wallpaper could literally kill you. The danger lies in the very color you admire. Green, the shade of vitality, freshness, and wealth, was all the rage. Aristocrats and middle-class families alike wanted drawing rooms draped in it. But the most brilliant greens were produced with arsenic pigments, particularly Scheele's green and Paris green. These weren't subtle little hints of the mineral. They were loaded with it. You run your fingers over the embossed pattern and unknowingly lift a fine dust that drifts into your lungs. Children press their noses against the wall during games of hide and seek, inhaling the poison as if it were fresh spring air. Historians tell us that arsenic wallpaper became notorious by the mid-19th century, but the Edwardians still hadn't entirely shaken it off. They loved color, and the interior design magazines of the time kept praising vibrancy. Imagine being a young couple moving into your first townhouse, proudly selecting the most eye-catching wallpaper sample in the catalog, never realizing you were choosing between beauty and breadth. The mainstream fact here is chilling. Arsenic in wallpaper didn't just sit quietly. In damp rooms, mold could feast on it, breaking the pigment down into arsine gas, which floated invisibly through the air. Families thought they were fighting ordinary mildew, while the true enemy seeped deeper with every humid night. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Victorian and Edwardian decorators sometimes licked the edge of wallpaper strips to help them stick as they applied them. Yes, you heard that right. Picture yourself smoothing down a pattern with your bare hands, tongue still tingling from a brush with poison. It gives DIY nightmare a whole new meaning. Historians still argue whether famous deaths, like that of Napoleon, whose wallpaper in exile contained arsenic, were truly caused by this silent killer or whether it was coincidence. But the suspicion stuck. Whispered rumors spread from drawing room to drawing room. Wallpaper was cursed. Wallpaper could kill. Some even claimed that bright green rooms made them feel perpetually ill, though polite society rarely blamed the decor directly. After all, no one wanted to admit their fashionable parlor was a death trap. So imagine sitting in that room on a rainy Edwardian evening. The fire in the grate flickers low and the dampness makes the wallpaper glisten. You lean back against the wall, maybe to rest your head after a long day, and you take a deep breath. There's a faint metallic tang, though you don't notice it right away. Your skin feels itchy where it touches the wall. Your throat rasps slightly. Children complain of stomach aches, but you chalk it up to too many sweets. Night after night, the symptoms accumulate until exhaustion becomes normal. Doctors of the era debated this fiercely. Some warned that wallpaper was a hidden scourge, while others scoffed, insisting it was harmless so long as it was dry. A few bold medical journals published case studies of entire households struck down by wall poisoning. Yet manufacturers continued to churn out rolls of arsenic-laden design because demand never slowed. Progress, again, was dressed in vibrant disguise. Here, where the imagery sharpens, the ornate wallpaper seems to pulse in lamplight, every flower petal glowing brighter than nature ever allowed. It tricks you, seduces you. And yet, just a fingertip stroke leaves residue beneath your nails. Families sometimes notice their children's toys coated in mysterious green dust. Dolls' faces, once porcelain white, grew faint smudges where little hands pressed them to the wall. In one fringe story that historians love to argue over, a little girl in an English household supposedly kept a scrap of green wallpaper in her scrapbook. She pressed flowers against it for safekeeping. Months later, she fell sick, and the preserved petals themselves tested positive for arsenic decades after. Was the wallpaper really to blame, or was it just a perfect storm of Victorian damp and fragile health? Scholars still debate the details, but the eerie lesson lingers. Beauty had fangs. And yet Edwardian families rarely stripped it away. Why? Because to host a gathering in a drab room was social suicide. Guests expected drama, richness, fashion. Bright greens paired with heavy curtains, lush carpets, and ornate furniture shouted prosperity. If you lacked it, your neighbors whispered. Better to risk a cough than admit to poverty. You shift again as though seated in one of those parlors. The wallpaper almost breathes beside you. Its flowers lean close, conspiratorial. You imagine reaching out with a candle flame and watching the paint blister, fumes curling up into the ceiling. People did notice eventually. By the early 20th century, journalists ran exposés demanding regulation. Manufacturers finally began reducing or removing arsenic pigments. But for decades, whole families had already lived, breathed, and suffered beneath those green vines. One more little irony. Arsenic was also being used in rat poison at the same time. Imagine that. The very chemical you spread on your walls to impress the neighbors was the same one you sprinkled in corners to keep vermin away. You're sitting in a parlor lined with the substance you'd never dare swallow, but here it is, wallpapered in inches around you. The Edwardians had rituals to cope, just as they did with Gaslight. Some families avoided the most fashionable colors, quietly choosing muted tones to dodge the risk. Others insisted on keeping parlors well ventilated, though this sometimes just spread the poison more evenly. Still others bought into protective myths, placing bowls of vinegar around rooms to absorb bad air, or blamming headaches on tight corsets instead of the walls themselves. Survival was, as always, a balancing act between denial and ingenuity. Now you lean closer, squinting at the patterns. They shimmer in lamplight, almost too bright, too alive. You catch yourself breathing shallowly, as though instinct tells you not to inhale too deeply. And maybe that instinct is right. The walls of an Edwardian home, so beautiful, so refined, could betray you as swiftly as any faulty lamp. Gaslight above, arsenic all around. You're beginning to see the pattern. Innovation brought color and light, but always a hidden toll. The glow of the gaslight hums above. The wallpaper leans toward you with its toxic shimmer, and then your attention drifts toward the heart of the house, the kitchen. The Edwardian kitchen was supposed to be the domain of progress, a triumph over soot and cold meals, the place where science promised to finally make daily life easier. But the truth, step into that room and you'll find yourself standing in one of the most dangerous spaces in the entire household. Because those miraculous new cook stoves, coal, gas, or a hybrid of both, were less like gentle helpers and more like half-tamed dragons waiting to belch fire. The mainstream historical fact is this: Edwardian families were moving away from open hearths and toward closed stoves. At first glance, this was safer. No more constant sparks spitting from a fireplace. Meals could be prepared faster with more control, and servants weren't constantly blackened by smoke. Advertisements bragged about modern efficiency and how gas burners meant less ash, less mess. But look closer. Gas stoves leaked almost constantly, seeping unburned gas into kitchens. One careless strike of a match, and the room could explode in a flash. You picture yourself standing there with a kettle in hand, when suddenly the stove erupts, knocking you backward as plates crash from the shelves. And the coal stoves weren't much friendlier. They burned hotter than open hearths, but the chimneys often clogged, sending smoke and carbon monoxide back into the house. Picture cooking a stew while the walls turn black. Your eyes water and your chest feels like it's filled with wet cloth. Some families, desperate for relief, threw open the kitchen door, only to let sparks lick onto the hallway carpet, setting the house ablaze. Now here's the quirky tidbit. Many Edwardian instruction manuals suggested testing gas lines with a lit candle. Yes, if you suspected a leak, the advice was literally to hold an open flame next to the pipe and see if it flickered. You don't need a modern safety inspector to tell you how well that ended. The manuals may as well have read: Step 1, strike match. Step 2, kiss your eyebrows goodbye. Historians still argue whether the switch to gas truly saved more lives than it cost. On the one hand, fewer children tumbled into open hearths or had skirts catch fire. On the other, gas leaks, faulty valves, and sudden explosions claimed entire households. Some scholars insist the death toll actually rose in urban centers during the transition. Others say it was simply a learning curve, that with proper ventilation and maintenance, gas stoves eventually became safer than coal. But for the families caught in the middle, the debate was meaningless. They were the guinea pigs in a great domestic experiment. You can almost hear the sounds of the Edwardian kitchen. The rattle of iron pots, the hiss of gas burners, the heavy thud of coal being shoveled into the stove. The air is thick, half delicious roast aromas, half acrid smoke. The cook wipes sweat from her brow, sleeves rolled, hair sticking damply to her forehead. Children sneak in hopping for scraps, but they cough as the haze stings their eyes. The cat curls too close to the stove, its whiskers singed by a sudden flare. And the explosions, oh, the newspapers loved those. Headlines blared about mysterious kitchen blast in Islington, or mother and child injured by gas range. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, gossiping about how the family must have left the valve open or carelessly struck a match. Nobody wanted to admit that their own stove, their own shiny purchase, might be just as unstable. Some families developed odd rituals to cope. One might sniff every burner before lighting it, noses pressed so close they risked singeing their hair. Another insisted on opening windows wide even in midwinter, swearing it kept the devil's fumes at bay. A few cautious households even kept buckets of sand nearby, convinced that water only spread grease fires. You can picture yourself standing there, ladle in hand, while your eye keeps flicking nervously to that bucket of sand in the corner, just in case. And yet, despite the danger, the cookstove was a status symbol. The bigger, shinier, and more complicated, the better. Coal stoves with nickel-plated fittings gleamed like trophies in advertisements. Gas stoves were displayed at exhibitions as the pinnacle of modern design. To admit you preferred the old open fire was to mark yourself as backward, even rustic. So families endured the danger for the sake of progress, pride, and roast beef that could finally be cooked in half the time. Here's another fringe tidbit for you. Some cooks actually preferred to listen to the stove rather than trust their eyes. They would lean close, ear tilted toward the hissing burner, and judge whether the flame was strong enough. Of course, leaning close to a leaky valve often meant a swift inhale of poison. But tradition dies hard, and in the Edwardian kitchen, habits mattered more than manuals. Now imagine yourself standing there at dinner time. The whole house depends on you, hungry children, impatient husband, guests arriving any moment. You bend over the oven to check the pie, and for just an instant the world goes white hot. When you wake, the pie is ash, your lashes are gone, and the wallpaper in the next room is curling from the heat. The family insists on repairing the stove rather than abandoning it. After all, what's a little danger compared to keeping up appearances? The kitchen was where survival instincts sharpened. Families learned to move fast, to check valves twice, to never strike a match in silence. Someone always shouted lighting as a warning. They adapted the way humans always do, and yet every meal carried a gamble. Progress had a taste, and sometimes it was bitter smoke on the back of your tongue. The warmth of the kitchen still lingers in your clothes, smoky, sooty, a little acrid, when you wander into another corner of the Edwardian home. This time, your ears catch a different rhythm. The steady ticking, the faint hissing, the occasional creak of pipes under pressure. It's not the stove this time, not the gas mantles overhead. It's the household boiler, the water system that promises every modern comfort, hot baths, warm radiators, steamy kitchens. And yet, as you stand listening to those little sounds, you realize you're sharing the house with a bomb. Boilers in the Edwardian period were marvels of progress. Families could finally enjoy hot water on demand instead of heating endless kettles over open fires. Radiators meant no more freezing bedrooms in winter. It was civilization itself, plumbed straight into the walls. But the danger lay in the pressure. Early hot water systems were temperamental. Valves stuck, pipes clogged, and safety releases failed. You might be sitting down to supper when, without warning, the basement shuddered like thunder. The next moment, scalding steam and metal fragments turned the house inside out. The mainstream historical fact is stark. Boiler explosions were a common occurrence in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Newspapers reported them with grim regularity, sometimes flattening a single home, other times ripping through an entire row of houses. Engineers scrambled to improve safety valves, yet accidents still multiplied. To modern ears, it sounds almost absurd. Why would anyone trust such a contraption? But to Edwardian families, the lure of instant hot water outweighed the shadow of catastrophe. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some households grew so anxious about their boilers that they appointed an unofficial listener. Often a child was told to crouch near the pipes and report any suspicious hissing. Imagine being 10 years old, ear pressed against a hot pipe, tasked with saving the family by detecting the faint sound of doom. Childhood games meet industrial espionage. right in the pantry. Historians still argue whether the frequency of explosions was due to poor design, poor maintenance, or simply the rush of demand. Cities were expanding rapidly, families crammed into townhouses, and everyone wanted hot water yesterday. Some scholars insist that manufacturers cut corners, producing boilers too cheaply. Others argue that owners neglected them, letting lime scale and soot choke the system until it failed. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Progress rolled out faster than households could adapt. Now picture yourself stepping into an Edwardian bathroom. The tub, a shining clawfoot wonder, is filling with steaming water. It looks heavenly, opalescent ripples lapping against porcelain, the mirror fogging over. You dip your hand in, smiling at the warmth. But behind the wall, the pipes groan. Steam hisses where it shouldn't. Somewhere in the bowels of the house, a valve strains. You don't know it yet, but the line between a relaxing soak and a catastrophic blast is razor-thin. The sounds of the house tell a story. A low hum beneath the floorboards, a sudden rattle in the radiator, the metallic ping of pipes expanding. Families grew attuned to these noises, able to distinguish between harmless quirks and ominous warnings. Or at least they thought they could. You imagine lying in bed, drifting towards sleep when the radiator bangs like cannon fire. Your heart jumps. Was it just settling metal or the start of something worse? And then there's the scalding. Even when boilers didn't explode, they betrayed their owners. Water temperatures surged unpredictably. Turn the tap too quickly, and instead of a warm stream, you got a torrent of near-boiling water. Many Edwardian households kept jugs of cold water nearby, ready to dump into the tub if things ran too hot. Picture yourself easing into a bath only to leap out with a yelp, your skin reddened, while the children giggle nervously in the doorway. One fringe anecdote suggests that some Edwardian households resorted to boiler prayers. Before bed, families would whisper a quick hope that the night would pass without incident. Historians still debate whether these were genuine traditions or exaggerations by later writers, but the image lingers. A family huddled in candlelight, murmuring words not for ghosts or thieves, but for the plumbing in their basement. The irony, as always, was prestige. Having a boiler meant you were truly modern. Guests marveled at endless hot water, at radiators humming with comfort. To admit you still heated wash basins with kettles was embarrassing. So families balanced their pride against the risk of sudden annihilation. It's a trade-off we recognize today, though the devices have changed. You lean closer, listening to the hissing behind the wall. You imagine yourself creeping down the stairs to the cellar, lamp in hand. The boiler squats there like some iron beast, sweat dripping from its valves, faint light glinting on bolts and rivets. It breathes in fits and starts, a dragon chained but not tamed. You set down your lamp, touch the metal, and feel it shudder. For a moment you wonder, is tonight the night? The Edwardians learned survival through vigilance. They checked pressure gauges obsessively, bled radiators to release air pockets, and kept a wary ear on the machinery. They adapted, yes, but they also lived with a constant undercurrent of fear. Every creak, every hiss carried the weight of potential catastrophe. And still, they endured because the promise of progress was too intoxicating to resist. Above you, the bath has filled. A child splashes happily, steam curling upward, laughter echoing against tile. It looks idyllic, but you know the truth. The comfort comes with a price, and every drop of warm water is borrowed against the possibility of fire and ruin. The hiss of the boiler fades behind you as you move through the Edwardian home, your footsteps muffled on thick rugs. At first, the silence feels safe. No more roaring flames, no groaning pipes. But then you notice a faint hum, a crackle that prickles at the edge of your hearing. You glance up, and there it is, a strange new marvel snaking along the ceiling and tucked behind plaster. Thin wires glowing faintly with promise. Electricity has arrived, and with it, another layer of danger. For Edwardian families, electricity was the cutting edge. Imagine living in a world where most of your neighbors still relied on gaslight, but you had bulbs that flared to life at the flick of a switch. Guests gasped when parlors lit instantly, no matches, no hissing flames. It was progress, prestige, and pure magic. but magic has teeth. Early wiring was experimental, clumsy, and often homemade. Rubber insulation cracked, cloth wrappings frayed, and sparks leapt from walls like mischievous sprites. You sit beneath a glowing bulb, listening to its faint buzz, while behind the plaster the wires heat like fused cords on the verge of combustion. The mainstream historical fact is this: insurance companies in the early 20th century listed electrical fires as one of the fastest growing causes of household disasters. Entire blocks could be lost when faulty wiring in a single townhouse set everything alight. Fire brigades described arriving at scenes where flames raced along joists, as though the wood itself had been wired for destruction. Electricity promised illumination, but often delivered inferno. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Edwardian advertisements bragged about shock therapy as a bonus feature of electric appliances. Devices like vibrating belts or electrical massage gloves were marketed as health aids. Families actually plugged themselves into danger, believing a mild jolt could cure fatigue, indigestion, even melancholia. Imagine strapping a tingling contraption around your waist after dinner, convinced it was medicine, when in reality you basically volunteered for a home experiment in electrocuting yourself. Historians still argue whether the rapid expansion of electricity was too reckless. Should governments have enforced stricter standards before homes were wired en masse? Some argue yes, that it was a gamble taken on the backs of ordinary families. Others insist the accidents were simply growing pains of progress, necessary to reach the safer systems we know today. Either way, Edwardian families bore the brunt of that debate with every spark in their walls. Now close your eyes and picture the scene. A parlor glows with new bulbs, glass shades etched with delicate designs. The light is whiter than gas, almost sterile, and it casts sharp shadows. Children laugh at the novelty, flicking the switch on and off, until their mother scolds them. Meanwhile, their father leans over a fuse box in the hall, peering at tangled wires like a man trying to read the entrails of a beast. The whole house hums faintly, alive in a way it never was before. You feel it in your fingertips when you brush the brass switch plate, a little sting that makes you snatch your hand back. And of course, there were shocks. Real, jolting, hair-raising shocks. Servants reported fainting after touching irons plugged into faulty sockets. Children cried when they accidentally grasped bare wires under rugs. Some households grew so paranoid that they insisted on shutting off the entire system at night, fumbling with switches by lamplight before bed. Others, too proud to admit fear, carried on, until one evening the curtains sparked and the drawing room filled with flames. Here's another fringe tidbit. Families sometimes installed electric lights alongside gas lamps, just in case. Dual systems meant double prestige, but also double the danger. Imagine a parlor with wires and gas pipes crisscrossing in the walls, each system capable of killing you in a different way. A spark here, a leak there, and suddenly your modern home becomes a very expensive funeral pyre. You tilt your head, listening to the buzz above you. The bulb flickers once, twice, then steadies. The sound reminds you of a trapped wasp. You glance at the socket, noticing how the cord frays where it meets the wall. The smell is faint, but it's there. A sharp tang of ozone, a hint of burning cloth. You imagine lying in bed, half asleep, when suddenly the room erupts in orange light, fire racing across the ceiling faster than you can shout. This was the Edwardian nightmare. Progress arriving not as a gift, but as a lightning strike. And yet families adapted. They kept buckets of water in hallways, inspected wires obsessively, and learned to live with the hum of potential disaster. Some swore by safe habits, never leaving an appliance plugged in, never running wires under carpets, never letting children near switches. Others treated electricity like an unruly pet, dangerous, yes, but thrilling to show off. So you sit there under the bulb, heart a little faster than before. You wonder if the hum you hear is real or just your imagination. The Edwardians lived with that same uncertainty every night. Innovation had given them light brighter than the sun, but with it came sparks that could turn a family's future to ash in seconds. The wires still hum behind you as you step carefully into the tiled chamber of the Edwardian bathroom. At first glance, it feels like a sanctuary. Clean lines, white porcelain gleaming beneath flickering light, the promise of comfort and modern hygiene. But beneath that glossy surface lurks something far more treacherous than a squeaky faucet. The Edwardians had welcomed a new marvel into their homes: indoor plumbing. And while it seems innocent enough today, back then it was a double-edged sword. You run your hand along the rim of a clawfoot tub. It's filled not with steaming bathwater yet, but with the ghosts of risk. Pipes snake through the walls, still experimental, still prone to mischief. Water didn't always come from a reliable main system. In many homes, it gurgled up from wells or cisterns that were, let's just say, less than pristine. To you, it looks like progress. To an Edwardian family, it often felt like gambling with every sip or soak. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Outbreaks of typhoid and cholera still flared up in Edwardian Britain and America, even among wealthier households who prided themselves on having modern bathrooms. Scientists knew by then that contaminated water carried disease, but the infrastructure to guarantee purity lagged behind. Imagine filling a pitcher straight from your gleaming tap, only to pour out what was essentially liquid roulette. And for your quirky tidbit, some Edwardians were so suspicious of bathroom drains that they insisted on plugging them tightly whenever the room wasn't in use. Why? They feared miasmas, bad airs creeping back up from the sewers. One London family reportedly kept heavy glass stoppers on every sink, convinced that sealing the drain was as important as locking the front door at night. You might chuckle, but the smell of sewer gas rising from poorly vented pipes was no laughing matter. More than one household fainted at the stench. Historians still argue whether the Edwardian embrace of indoor plumbing actually improved health in the short term. Some claim it spread disease faster by centralizing water systems before those systems were fully safe. Others argue the psychological comfort, feeling modern, feeling clean, was itself a step toward healthier living. But in truth, many families were stuck in the gap between idea and execution, using porcelain bowls that looked sanitary but carried hidden risk. Picture an Edwardian morning. Children splash in the bathtub, soap bubbles clinging to their hair. Their mother hums as she fills pitchers, thrilled at not having to pump water from a yard well. The father in his waistcoat shaves at the sink, a gleaming razor in hand. It's a picture of progress. Yet beneath the tiles, the pipes sweat with rust, and in the cistern above, bacteria swirl unseen. You sip the water in your imagination and taste not just minerals but danger. And plumbing mishaps weren't only microbial. Imagine an Edwardian toilet tank, wooden, high on the wall, suddenly bursting its fittings. Gallons of water cascade down like a small Niagara, warping floorboards and flooding parlors. Insurance reports from the time note costly damage from these accidents, entire staircases rotting after weeks of unnoticed leaks. Families joked about being drowned in their own homes, but the laughter had a nervous edge. There's a fringe detail you'll love. Some early flush mechanisms involved complicated chains and levers, so fragile that toilets sometimes flushed themselves in the middle of the night. Imagine lying in bed, hearing that ghostly whoosh echo through the dark house. Was it the wind? Was it spirits? No, just faulty plumbing, but to a half-asleep Edwardian child, it was nightmare fuel. You crouch by the bath, dipping imaginary fingers in the cool water. The scent of soap clings to the air, masking something metallic, something sour beneath. Perhaps it's only your imagination, but maybe it's the very real hint of lead. Lead pipes, common then, leached quietly into water, poisoning families slowly. Headaches, fatigue, strange behavior, all explained away as nerves or stress, when in reality the culprit was running right through the walls. And yet, like the gaslight, like the electricity, Edwardians persevered. They believed in progress. They placed flowers in bathroom vases, read magazines while soaking in long baths, and congratulated themselves on living in the modern age. You can almost hear the pride in their voices as they boasted to neighbors. We have indoor plumbing now, no more trudging to the outhouse. They weren't wrong. Life was easier, but easier did not mean safer. You turn the faucet in your imagination and watch the water gush. It looks clear, it sounds pure, but you can't help but recall the warnings you've already encountered tonight. The Edwardians lived with that same mix of awe and anxiety. Every glass of water could refresh or ruin. Every bath could cleanse or contaminate. And every pipe rattling in the wall was another reminder that innovation came at a price. The water's trickle fades behind you as you climb back into the Edwardian parlor. The air feels dry now, warmed by a strange contraption set squarely in the corner. It's not a fireplace, though it gives off a glow. No, this is something altogether newer, flashier, and, in its own way, deadlier. Edwardian homes were filling up with gadgets. The vacuum cleaner, the electric iron, the gas-heated stove, even the proto-toaster, all promised to lighten the domestic load. But in truth, each was a ticking time bomb, buzzing, sparking, or leaking its way toward catastrophe. You pause, staring at a gleaming contraption with rubber hoses and a humming motor, the early vacuum. To modern eyes, it looks more like a fire pump than a cleaning tool. These beasts were noisy, temperamental, and far from safe. Motors overheated, belts snapped, and sparks flew whenever brushes clogged with dust. Imagine the shock of an Edwardian maid dutifully cleaning the carpet, only for the machine to belch smoke like a locomotive in the drawing room. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Advertisements from the early 1900s promised that domestic gadgets would give housewives hours of freedom and joy. But newspapers also reported rising numbers of burns, shocks, and fires linked to these very same devices. The electric iron, in particular, was infamous. Forget to unplug it, and you might return to find a scorched hole through your ironing board and half the draperies gone as well. For your quirky tidbit, some wealthy households employed gadget demonstrators to show off new appliances at dinner parties. Picture a guest pausing mid-spoonful of pudding, while a salesman plugged in a whirring contraption to toast bread before their very eyes. Imagine the pride, the applause, followed swiftly by the acrid smell of singed linen when the demo went wrong. Progress doubled as party entertainment, and occasionally as party ruination. Historians still argue whether these early domestic gadgets truly lightened labor or simply shifted the workload. Some say appliances liberated women from endless scrubbing and cooking. Others argue they raised expectations. If you had an iron, suddenly every shirt had to be crisp. If you had a vacuum, every rug had to be spotless. Families found themselves bound more tightly to housework than before, tethered not by tradition but by wires, cords, and gas lines. Picture a bright morning in an Edwardian kitchen. The stove hums with blue gas flames, so clean, so modern compared to coal. A kettle rattles, tea soon ready. Meanwhile, an iron glows faintly on the table, left warming a bit too long. The maid watches nervously as the vacuum roars in the hallway, its belt whining like an unhappy cat. All around, the house buzzes with machines. Comfort and chaos twine together. You can almost smell the mix of scorched fabric, hot metal, and boiled cabbage. And not all gadgets were electrical. Some were hand-cranked monstrosities, boasting safety in bold lettering while slicing fingers with ruthless efficiency. Meat grinders, apple peelers, butter churns, all promised convenience, all demanded a toll of skin or bone from distracted users. Children were warned to keep their hands away, but curiosity and little fingers rarely listened. Here's a fringe tidbit. One popular invention was the electric servant, essentially a timer you could set to start breakfast automatically. Imagine eggs left out overnight, gently cooked by an unattended gas stove at dawn. Sounds efficient, until you consider the food poisoning, the gas leaks, or the inevitable flare-up when bacon grease met naked flame. You reach toward the iron in your imagination. Its surface glows faintly, almost alive. You imagine brushing against it, the sudden hiss as skin meets heat. The pain lingers even in your thoughts. Edwardian families lived with that constant risk. One careless moment, one forgotten cord, one distracted glance, and the house filled with smoke. But for all the dangers, there was wonder too. Families marveled at the speed of a meal cooked on gas instead of coal, at the ease of cleaning rugs without beating them in the yard. They boasted to neighbors about gadgets as proudly as they boasted about wallpaper or gardens. Progress was thrilling. Deadly, yes, but thrilling. So here you sit, surrounded by humming, whirring, sparking contraptions. The Edwardians called them labor-saving devices. You might call them hazards with handles. Either way, they transformed the home into a workshop of innovation and a carnival of risk. The kitchen hum fades as you drift into another Edwardian parlor, this one brighter, with vases of cut flowers perched on every available surface. The wallpaper glows faintly green in the lamplight, delicate patterns curling like ivy across the walls. At first, it feels like beauty, refinement, taste, a celebration of home. But you inhale and a bitter tang clings to the back of your throat. That elegant wallpaper, it's laced with arsenic, those brilliant dyes in the children's toys. They hide mercury and lead. The Edwardian family lived inside a museum of poisons, wrapped in beauty that could betray them at any moment. The mainstream historical fact is startling. Even after the mid-19th century scandals over Scheele's green wallpaper killing families, arsenic-laced pigments were still sold well into the Edwardian period. Entire rooms could off-gas toxins, leaving families dizzy, weak, and mysteriously ill. Doctors noted the sick rooms where wallpaper literally glowed with deadly charm. Families blamed fatigue or bad humors, never suspecting the flowers printed behind their beds were quietly poisoning them. Here's your quirky tidbit. Victorian and Edwardian women sometimes licked the tips of their paintbrushes while crafting delicate decorations, cards, porcelain, even nursery murals. The paints often contained lead or arsenic, so while one generation of mothers decorated lovingly, they also dosed themselves with toxins in microscopic sips. Imagine an afternoon tea with friends, each woman unknowingly sharing the same slow fate with every dainty stroke. Historians still argue whether manufacturers knowingly kept toxic pigments on the market. Some records suggest they understood the dangers but downplayed them for profit. Others say awareness was scattered. Scientists knew, but consumers remained oblivious. The truth probably lies in the murky space between, where ignorance and indifference met. Now picture yourself in a child's Edwardian nursery. The walls are painted a cheerful blue, the toy blocks are coated in glossy red, the rocking horse's mane gleams with chemical white. A child's laughter fills the air as wooden trains clatter across the floor. But in your mind's eye, every color glows faintly radioactive. The paint chips if you scrape it, and little hands inevitably put chips to lips. You feel the queasy dread that parents of the time rarely recognized. And it wasn't only walls and toys. Cosmetics glistened with bismuth, lead, and mercury. The Edwardian woman powdering her nose before dinner might be slowly eroding her health for the sake of pale elegance. Household cleaners carried warnings like "for vermin only," but were stored next to flour and tea. Even fabrics were dyed with dangerous mordants that bled into sweat and skin. The home was not merely unsafe. It was a chemical experiment running without consent. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some fashionable hostesses displayed vases of cut flowers dyed bright, unnatural shades, preserved with toxic salts. Guests admired them, leaned in to sniff, and carried home headaches that lasted days. The flowers seemed eternal, but they left their admirers reeling. Beauty, once again, bit back. You step closer to the wallpaper. Its green pattern swirls like ivy, vibrant even in dim light. You raise your hand, imagining brushing against it, and you almost expect to feel it crumble to powder. That powder, if real, would cling to your fingertips, ready to be inhaled or ingested. It looks harmless. It looks gorgeous. And yet it whispers danger in silence. Families adjusted in small ways. Some opened windows wide to dilute the air. Others swapped certain paints for safer versions, though definitions of safe were laughable by today's standards. A few health-conscious households rejected color altogether, opting for stark white walls that looked sterile but at least didn't glow with poison. Imagine a dinner guest remarking, "So plain, so modern," never realizing the host's plain walls were also an act of defiance against invisible killers. And still, most Edwardians carried on. They admired their patterned walls, their toys, their powders. They believed that comfort and color were signs of progress, symbols of prosperity. To question that was to risk seeming backward. So they stayed, wrapped in arsenic ivy, bathed in mercury light, proud of their homes even as those homes quietly turned against them. You breathe in, steady and slow, but the bitter tang lingers in your throat. You can't quite shake the thought, beauty here is never free. The painted nursery fades behind you as you drift further down the hallway, where a faint breeze whispers beneath the door. You push it open and step into a small Edwardian bedroom. Lace curtains flutter, the bed is neatly turned down, and on the nightstand rests a tiny bottle with a cheerful label, soothing syrup. You tilt the bottle and hear the faint slosh of thick liquid inside. It was medicine, or so families believed, but in truth, it was poison wrapped in a promise. Edwardian households adored patent medicines. Bottles and tins filled cupboards, each claiming to cure everything from teething pain to female hysteria. Labels screamed with confidence, miracle elixir, guaranteed relief. But behind the cheerful typography lurked a witch's brew of opium, morphine, alcohol, and chloroform. You picture a worried mother spooning syrup into her baby's mouth, sighing in relief when the child finally drifts off to sleep. She doesn't know that the miracle is simply narcotics, dulling nerves at a cost she can't yet imagine. Here's the mainstream historical fact. One of the most infamous concoctions was Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, widely sold throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Advertised for restless infants, it contained morphine, enough to kill a small child if dosed too freely. And yet, it was stocked proudly in pharmacies, recommended by neighbors, even endorsed in newspapers. Families trusted it because everyone did. For your quirky tidbit, some tonics marketed for men's vitality contain not only alcohol but traces of strychnine, a poison that in tiny doses caused a jittery, stimulant-like effect. Imagine sipping your daily pick-me-up, not realizing you were microdosing a chemical better suited for rat traps. Edwardian mornings were a cocktail of faith, ignorance, and danger. Historians still argue whether the popularity of these medicines reflected consumer gullibility or sheer desperation. Did families believe the claims because they were naive, or because they had so few real medical options? Perhaps both. Doctors were expensive, hospitals intimidating, and modern pharmaceuticals still scarce. A friendly-looking bottle on the shelf seemed like a godsend, until it was. Picture yourself in that bedroom again. The baby fusses, red-faced and inconsolable. The parents are exhausted, shadows under their eyes, nerves frayed. The mother lifts the syrup bottle, shakes it gently, pours a spoonful. The sweet scent of alcohol fills the air. She tips it into the child's mouth. Within minutes, the baby slumps into calm, breathing slow and heavy. The parents sigh in relief. They don't see the danger, only the peace. But you, standing in the doorway, feel the dread. You know the stillness could become permanent. And it wasn't just bobbies. Adults guzzled tonics laced with cocaine for pep, cough syrup swimming with opiates, and digestive bitters that were basically whiskey in disguise. The line between remedy and recreation blurred until families didn't know the difference. A grandmother's arthritis eased, yes, but so did her grip on reality. A father's nerves calmed, but so did his ability to stand straight after 3 nightly doses. Here's another fringe tidbit. Some of these medicines were sold by door-to-door salesmen who performed flashy demos like pulling worms from children's mouths with supposed remedies. In reality, they were sleight-of-hand tricks designed to convince parents that their children were crawling with parasites only their product could cure. It was theater, fraud, and poison all in one shiny package. You reach for the bottle on the nightstand, fingers brushing its cool glass. The label is cheerful, tiny flowers, bold promises, but the liquid inside gleams darkly. You almost hear a whisper, "Trust me, I'll make it better." The Edwardians heard that whisper every day, and most of them obeyed. They measured spoons of syrup, poured glasses of tonic, rubbed salves on aching limbs. They believed, and belief was often fatal. Families slowly learned. Medical reformers campaigned against quack cures. newspapers began exposing scandals, and by the 1910s, governments pushed toward regulation. But change was slow, and bottles lingered in cupboards long after warnings appeared. For years, Edwardian homes remained filled with miracles that could kill. So you set the bottle back down, careful not to spill a drop. The room feels heavier now, the lace curtains more oppressive, the air laced with the sweet sting of syrup and secrets. The Edwardian home, once again, reveals its darkest truth. Even comfort, even care, came spiked with danger. The lace curtains drift shut behind you, and you follow the creak of floorboards toward a narrow staircase. At the top, the hallway bends sharply into a garret where the air feels dry, metallic, and sharp. You duck under a low beam and step into the attic. Dust swirls, and the scent hits you instantly. Sharp mothballs, bitter disinfectant, and the faint metallic whiff of rat poison. Edwardian homes were battlegrounds against pests, and the weapons they chose were often deadlier than the intruders themselves. The mainstream historical fact is this: arsenic-based powders, phosphorus pastes, and strychnine pellets were among the most common household pest killers in the Edwardian period. They were cheap, effective, and widely available, and yet they were stored casually in kitchens, tucked on pantry shelves beside sugar and flour, or sprinkled liberally across bedrooms to keep moths at bay. One careless spoonful, one mislabeled tin, and a family dinner could turn into a death sentence. For your quirky tidbit, camphor balls, what we now call mothballs, were so strongly scented that families joked they could smell their neighbors' closets from the street. Some people even hung them as air fresheners in bedrooms, believing the pungent chemical aroma meant the room was safe from illness. In reality, breathing camphor-laced air for weeks could cause nausea, dizziness, or worse. Imagine tucking into bed each night under quilts steeped in poison, convinced it was the fragrance of health. Historians still argue whether Edwardians underestimated the risks or simply had no safer options. Did they trust these poisons because they were sold in respectable tins at respectable shops, or did they knowingly gamble, hoping the benefits outweighed the cost? Some scholars argue the household arsenal reflected desperation. Pests spread disease, chewed clothes, and ruined food. Others suggest it was simply another symptom of the era's obsession with chemical quick fixes. Now picture the attic more closely. A grandmother opens a trunk filled with winter coats, shaking out mothballs like dice across the boards. Downstairs, a child sneaks into the pantry, curious about the bright tin of rat poison beside the biscuits. In the parlor, a maid sprinkles powder along the baseboards, humming as white dust drifts into cracks. The entire house smells faintly of chemicals, sharp, medicinal, reassuring to some, menacing to others. And then there were accidents. Newspapers carried grim stories of families poisoned after mistaking arsenic powder for baking flour. Imagine a kitchen heavy with the smell of fresh bread, only for dinner to end in agony because the white powder wasn't what it seemed. Children swallowed pellets like candy. Servants fainted in fumigated cellars. Pets died by the dozens. All the while, families carried on, convinced these tools were necessary shields against infestation. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some Edwardians believed phosphorus paste used in rat poison could also act as a love charm if hidden beneath a bed. A bizarre superstition, half joke and half ritual, but one that led to accidental poisonings when curious lovers actually experimented. Romance by rat bait, not exactly safe. You kneel in the attic, peering at the tins lined neatly against the wall. Their labels are ornate, almost beautiful script fonts, bold borders, promises of efficiency. Kills instantly, guaranteed protection, safe for home use. The irony clings to the air. You can almost taste the bitterness on your tongue, feel the sting in your throat. For the Edwardians, these products were both comfort and curse, trusted friends and lurking enemies. And yet they adapted. Families learned to label tins carefully, to store poisons on high shelves, to lecture children sternly about what was safe and what was not. They handled mothballs with tongs. They wrapped arsenic powders in layers of cloth. They tried their best. But try as they might, mistakes happened. And the Edwardian home, always eager to modernize, always eager to control, kept finding ways to betray its inhabitants. The attic grows darker as the evening deepens. The mothballs glimmer faintly like pearls in a trunk, but their beauty is hollow. You take one step back, careful not to stir the powder beneath your feet. For a moment you wonder, was the Edwardian house truly a home or a carefully decorated minefield? You step away from the attic's sting of camphor and arsenic, descending creaking stairs back into the warmth of a sitting room. The flicker of light catches your eye, not from a lamp or bulb this time, but from a tiny object glowing like a trapped firefly. On the mantel rests a pocket watch, its dial painted so the numbers shine in the dim. Beside it, a decorative clock glows faintly, luminous hands ticking away. To an Edwardian family, this glow seemed nothing short of sorcery. To you, knowing better, it feels like standing beside a ghost. The age of radium had arrived, and with it came a slow, invisible danger. The mainstream historical fact: radium, discovered in 1898 by Marie and Pierre Curie, was quickly commercialized. By the early 20th century, manufacturers used its luminous qualities in watches, clocks, and even household dials. Advertisements praised it as the light that never dies. Families marveled at the idea that they could tell the time in pitch darkness. But the cost was silent radiation, saturating the very objects meant to make life convenient. And here's your quirky tidbit. Radium was not only used in timepieces, but also in bizarre household products. Face creams that promised radiant skin, tonics that claimed to boost vitality, even toothpaste laced with the element. Imagine brushing your teeth with a glow-in-the-dark paste, convinced you were cleansing yourself into immortality, while instead gnawing away at your very bones. Historians still argue whether ordinary Edwardian families understood the risk. Some say they couldn't have. Scientists themselves were still dazzled by radium's promise, and dangers weren't widely publicized until later. Others insist suspicion simmered beneath the surface. After all, people noticed that radium workers developed strange sores and illnesses. But whether through ignorance or denial, luminous products found their way into homes anyway. Picture the scene. A child lies in bed, whispering under the covers. On the bedside table, a clock glows softly, greenish light painting the room with an eerie calm. The child giggles, tracing shapes in the glow, comforted by its presence. The parents, proud of their modern purchase, tell visitors how wonderful it is. No more fumbling in the dark. You, standing in the doorway, see not comfort but a ticking time bomb. That gentle glow is eating away invisibly at everyone in the room. Accidents happen too. Luminous paint flaked, coating fingers and slipping onto dining tables. A curious child might lick the glowing numbers, entranced by the strange magic. Some workers at dial factories, the infamous radium girls, pointed their brushes with their lips, ingesting specks of the element daily. Their suffering would become infamous, but at this moment in Edwardian time, the glow was still considered glamorous. Here's a fringe tidbit. Radium-laced health spas offered baths in radioactive water, promising to cure arthritis, skin conditions, even infertility. Families traveled to these destinations, submerging themselves in glowing pools, convinced they were absorbing life itself. You can almost picture it. Edwardian mothers, fathers, children, all smiling as they basked in water that sparkled faintly in the dark, unknowingly bathing in decay. You reach for the pocket watch on the mantel. Its hands gleam faintly, steady and hypnotic. The metal is cool, but you imagine the slow burn hidden within, a fire that never goes out. You hold it closer, the glow painting your skin a pale green. For a moment, you almost believe the marketing promises, that this is health, vitality, progress. Then you remember, progress here whispers in half-lives, not hope. Families grew attached to these glowing marvels. They bragged about their luminous clocks, they trusted their radium creams, they admired the odd glow of their health tonics. Few realized that the light in their homes was bought with invisible suffering. They carried on, proud of their modernity, while unknowingly poisoning themselves inch by inch. The room grows darker as you set the watch back down. The glow on the mantel pulses softly like a heartbeat. You take a step back, uneasy. Edwardian innovation had once again proven its pattern: promise, pride, and peril, all wrapped in a package that fit neatly onto a bedside table. You lean away from the eerie glow of that mantelpiece watch and find yourself wandering into another corner of Edwardian life. The kitchen table, stacked high with bottles, packets, and tins. They glitter with bold typography: tonic, elixir, cure-all. Labels promise vigor, longer life, and relief from every ache. You pick one up, amber glass, heavy in the palm, cork sealed tight, and read the flourish. A marvel of modern science, restores energy at once. You can almost hear the Edwardian salesman's voice, rich with conviction. But as you tilt it, the liquid inside shimmers with something sinister. Welcome to the world of Quack cures, where trust in science blended with the deadliest deceptions. The mainstream historical fact: Edwardian Britain and America teemed with patent medicines. With limited regulation before the Pure Food and Drug Act, 1906 in the U.S., and similar reforms in Britain, almost anyone could bottle a brew of alcohol, cocaine, morphine, or strychnine and market it as a health tonic. Families lined up to buy them, eager to treat everything from headaches to consumption. The allure wasn't just the promise of cure, but the packaging: sleek glass, gold lettering, often stamped with phrases like "doctor recommended," even when no doctor had ever heard of it. Here's your quirky tidbit. One particularly popular tonic, Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, was widely given to infants. Parents swore it quieted bobbies instantly, no surprise since it contained morphine. Entire generations of toddlers spent their earliest years drugged into silence. Imagine being an Edwardian parent, exhausted by the ceaseless crying of your child, pouring a spoonful of syrup that promised peace. The silence must have felt heavenly. The reality: thousands of infant deaths across the late 19th and early 20th centuries. A tragedy buried beneath glowing testimonials. And scholars still argue whether families truly believed these concoctions or simply clung to desperate hope. Some historians insist the ignorance was genuine. After all, medical knowledge was thin and trust in printed words was high. Others suggest that a quiet suspicion lingered, but parents chose to believe the promises because the alternatives, untreated illness, lingering pain, were far worse. Was it self-deception or genuine faith in progress? No one can pin the answer firmly. You picture the Edwardian dinner table, father uncorking a tonic before supper, pouring a measure into his glass. He swirls it like brandy, his children watching with awe as the liquid glints. He smiles, proclaiming how strong he feels, how ready for another day's work. Mother sips hers delicately, assuring herself it will keep away the flu. Even grandmother joins in, claiming her joints ache less after a daily dose. To them, this is medicine. To you, peering from the shadows, it's poison disguised as relief. The most chilling detail is how these concoctions were woven into everyday rituals. A spoonful before bed, a glass upon rising. Bottles lined mantels like trophies, proudly displayed to visitors. Neighbors compared notes: which elixir cured headaches faster, which syrup quieted children best. Conversations about Quack cures became social chatter, as common as recipes or fashion tips. One fringe tidbit will make you shiver. Radium, a radium-infused tonic, was actually sold as a health drink. Yes, families drank radioactive water by the spoonful, believing it boosted stamina. A wealthy industrialist famously consumed so much radium that his bones disintegrated, a story that shocked the public later. But in the Edwardian moment, glowing drinks seemed futuristic. Families sipped the light of decay and smiled, convinced they were glowing with vitality. You lean closer to the table, brushing dust from a label. Guaranteed safe for all ages, it proclaims in bold ink. Your lips twitch at the irony. Families trusted these words because the government hadn't yet forced truth into labeling. No lists of ingredients, no warnings, no fine print, just promises. The most desperate families, plagued by tuberculosis or cholera, clung to bottles like talismans. Some might have suspected it was false hope, but false hope was better than none. Imagine the children tugging at their mother's sleeve for a taste of the sweet syrup. Imagine parents forcing down bitter drafts, grimacing but swallowing, convinced it would ease their suffering. For some, relief did come, temporary, artificial, but real enough to feed belief. For others, collapse followed swiftly, unexplained but quietly accepted. After all, illness was everywhere. Who could say what truly killed a man? You linger on this thought, the way families normalized daily poisonings because science promised progress. They couldn't see the skull beneath the gilt lettering, couldn't hear the death rattle behind the sales pitch. They wanted cures so badly they chose to believe, and in that belief lay the seeds of their undoing. The bottles rattle softly as you set one down, cork squeaking against glass. In the quiet room, their promises still echo: cure-all, tonic, elixir. You step back uneasy, realizing that Edwardian innovation didn't always lurk in machines or gaslights. It sometimes hid in plain sight on the shelf, waiting for an eager hand. You leave behind the clinking bottles of syrup and tonic, stepping instead into a parlor buzzing with hum and crackle. In the corner stands a strange contraption, a heavy box of polished wood, brass fittings gleaming, wires coiled like snakes along its sides. Atop it, a large glass bulb glows faintly, emitting a soft hiss that makes your hair stand on end. The family gathers around it, faces lit with awe. This is no tonic, no lamp. This is the marvel of electricity. And while the Edwardians adored its modern magic, they also lived in fear that one careless touch might end them in an instant. The mainstream historical fact: electricity spread rapidly through Edwardian homes, but wiring was primitive. Insulation was poor, fuses often absent, and fire hazards constant. Outlets sparked, cords frayed, and homes not built for wiring sometimes caught fire within walls. Families adored their new electric lamps, irons, and even early toasters, but every plug-in carried risk. Newspapers of the era reported mysterious house fires and shock deaths, often blamed on faulty wiring or poorly designed appliances. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 1903, newspapers reported cases of Edwardian families using electricity not just for light but for entertainment. Amateur inventors hooked wires to food at dinner parties, demonstrating how electricity could cook meat or jolt wine glasses into song. Guests shrieked and laughed, convinced they were glimpsing the future. You can picture it. Edwardian ladies leaning forward, daring each other to touch a charged fork, only to yelp as sparks flew. A parlor trick with life and death stakes. Historians still argue whether families truly feared electricity or embraced it wholeheartedly. Some suggest people were terrified, treating sockets like venomous snakes, never touching cords without gloves. Others argue fascination outweighed fear, pointing to the craze for electric demonstrations and the willingness to electrify nearly everything. The truth likely lies somewhere between awe and caution, a dance of progress on a wire's edge. Now picture this: an Edwardian mother ironing with a new electric model, marveling at how quickly it heats compared to the old coal-heated kind. But she doesn't notice the cord fraying where it meets the plug. Her child toddles by, reaching for the dangling wire. A spark leaps, bright as lightning, and suddenly the room smells of burnt cloth. Panic follows, but within weeks the iron is back in use because convenience is irresistible. Some families grew so cautious they insisted on turning off their power entirely at night, pulling main switches like priests extinguishing altar flames. Others ignored warnings, stringing wires dangerously across rugs and walls. Fires often broke out behind plaster, unnoticed until smoke poured into bedrooms. And still, the lamps kept glowing, their light too precious to surrender. One fringe tidbit may amuse and horrify at once. Early electric vibrators, marketed as health devices, were sold to families for home use. Yes, Edwardian catalogs promised these gadgets would cure nervous ailments and hysteria. Housewives plugged them in with the same pride as they did irons or sewing machines. Imagine an Edwardian family displaying their new therapeutic device to visitors, boasting of its medical benefits, completely oblivious to the blush-inducing irony. For children, electricity was irresistible. They poked fingers into sockets, toyed with cords, marveled at the glow of filaments. Parents warned them with half-joking threats. Touch that, and you'll light up like a Christmas tree. But accidents happen, some ending with singed hair, others with funerals described delicately in local papers. Step closer to the humming box in the parlor. Its brass knobs gleam, its glass bulb flickers like captured lightning. The family is enthralled, leaning forward to bask in the glow. To them, this is triumph. No more smoky lamps, no more messy candles. You, however, see shadows dancing on the walls, shadows shaped like sparks, flames, and funerals. Electricity, like radium or gas, promised a better life. And like those earlier marvels, it came with invisible claws. Families lived at once safer and more endangered, their houses glowing like lanterns and smoldering like tinderboxes. Each flick of a switch was both victory and gamble. You step back from the parlor, heart thudding with the hiss of unseen current. Progress, you realize, often arrives not as a steady march but as a jolt, a shock that both illuminates and terrifies. Edwardian families, perched at the edge of modernity, learned that truth with every glowing bulb. You move from the parlor's crackle of electricity into a quieter hallway, where the air smells faintly of ink, glue, and the musty sweetness of paper. A bookshelf leans against the wall, lined with children's books and serial novels, their covers brightly painted, their pages crisp. An Edwardian father crouches, pulling down a copy of a popular illustrated storybook. He hands it to his daughter, who beams, clutching the gift as if it were treasure. And in a sense, it is. But as you glance closer at the ornate pages, a darker truth creeps in. These books aren't just full of stories. They're steeped in toxic ink and poisoned pages. The mainstream historical fact. Well into the Edwardian era, many books, wallpapers, and even children's toys were colored with pigments containing arsenic, lead, and other heavy metals. Green dyes, especially the brilliant Shields green and Paris green, gave illustrations their vivid life but leached poison into tiny fingers that lingered too long on the page. Families cherished these books as educational treasures, never realizing that each bedtime story carried an unseen sting. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some publishers produced glow-in-the-dark children's books, where illustrations were coated with phosphorescent paint. Imagine little Edwardian boys and girls hiding under blankets, marveling at glowing pictures of fairies and knights, unaware that the very glow was laced with compounds no safer than those in fireworks. Parents probably thought it charming, even magical, to see their children captivated by pages that seemed alive. Yet each glow was a whisper of danger. And historians still argue whether the danger was exaggerated or deadly. Some claim only prolonged exposure caused harm, that a child would need to lick or chew the pages to truly risk poisoning. Others point to records of illnesses, rashes, and mysterious deaths linked to toxic greens in household items. Was every bedtime story an executioner, or were most families spared by luck and light contact? The debate lingers like dust on the shelves. You picture an Edwardian nursery, wallpaper blooming with floral patterns, a bookshelf lined with storybooks, a toy chest bursting with painted blocks. The room is a riot of color, bright greens, deep blues, glowing yellows. But to your eyes, trained by hindsight, it looks less like a child's paradise and more like a laboratory of hazards. A baby gnaws on a painted toy. A boy sprawls on the carpet, leafing through a book illustrated with toxic pigments. A girl kisses the cover of her favorite story before sleep. The poison seeps slowly, invisibly, with every touch. Sometimes the danger wasn't subtle. Cheaply bound books shed colored dust, leaving smears on children's hands, which then found their way to mouths and eyes. Printers rarely considered safety. The vibrancy of color was all that mattered. A richly illustrated story sold better than a drab one, and profit eclipsed prudence. One fringe tidbit: arsenic-laced wallpapers and books were sometimes reused creatively. Families repurposed pages for scrapbooks, or even as makeshift wrapping paper for gifts. Imagine receiving a birthday parcel wrapped in pages that sparkled with deadly green, the child tearing into it eagerly, none the wiser. Progress and peril often arrived in the same ribbon-tied package. For parents, these books symbolized education, status, and love. They believed they were giving their children tools for the future, stories to spark imagination, illustrations to brighten dull evenings. You can almost hear the pride in their voices. "My daughter is already reading at 5," or "My son has finished the whole volume of fairy tales." They didn't know that the future was being written not only in ink, but in toxins absorbed through their children's very skin. The hush of the hallway deepens as you close the book in your hands. The pages whisper as they settle, the green illustrations glowing faintly in the dim. You place it back on the shelf, careful not to linger. Progress, you realize, wasn't always mechanical or electrical. Sometimes it was printed on a page, bound in leather, and slipped quietly into a child's bedtime. And like every other marvel of the Edwardian home, it came wrapped in equal parts wonder and danger. You drift away from the nursery's shelves, down a narrow corridor where the air grows colder, as though the walls themselves are sighing with the weight of memory. You pass a series of rooms, each one whispering with echoes of all the marvels and menaces you've witnessed. The hiss of gas jets, the faint glow of radium dials, the silent menace of wallpapers, the humming crackle of wires. It strikes you now. Edwardian families did not simply live in homes. They lived inside experiments. Grand, glittering, often deadly experiments disguised as progress. The mainstream historical fact. The Edwardian era was a pivot between tradition and modernity. Horse-drawn carriages still shared streets with motor cars, and coal fires burned alongside electric bulbs. The domestic sphere became a testing ground for inventions that promised convenience but often ignored safety. Scholars describe the period as one of reckless innovation, where optimism in science outpaced regulation, and ordinary families became the first line of trial and error. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Edwardian households actually hosted demonstration dinners, where salesmen would showcase new gadgets in real time: gas stoves cooking roasts, electric heaters warming soup, even radium-based health lamps flickering beside dessert. Families sat through these shows wide-eyed, then placed orders on the spot. You can almost imagine the children tugging at their parents' sleeves, begging for the glowing clock or the new stove, convinced they were watching magic unfold. And historians still argue whether these families were victims of blind faith or active participants in their own risk-taking. Some argue they had no choice. Progress swept into their homes before dangers could be understood. Others suggest Edwardians were willing gamblers, intoxicated by novelty, knowingly trading safety for the thrill of the future. Did they suffer ignorance, or did they shrug and say, "Well, that's the price of progress"? No one agrees fully, which leaves us suspended in the debate. Picture an Edwardian evening. The family gathers in the parlor, father reading by electric lamp, mother dabbing a health cream that sparkles faintly in the glow, children sprawled on the rug with brightly colored books. The house hums with gas and current, each corner ticking with some marvel of invention. They are warm, comfortable, and proud of their modern home. And yet unseen forces stalk them. Carbon monoxide curling unseen near the ceiling, radium dust glowing softly in the mantel clock, pigments whispering poison into fingertips. The house is both haven and hazard, sanctuary and snare. And here's the fringe tidbit to bring it home. Some Edwardian spiritualists claim that the dangers of modern invention weren't accidents at all, but manifestations of restless energies, ghosts disturbed by humanity's meddling with unseen forces. Seances of the time sometimes warned sitters that their glowing clocks or buzzing wires carried more than physical peril. They were gateways for the uncanny. It sounds like superstition now, but if you've walked through this house tonight as you have, maybe you can understand why the Edwardians felt haunted. The more you reflect, the more you realize. Survival wasn't always about avoiding catastrophe, but about adapting. Families opened windows to vent gas, repainted walls to cover arsenic green, switched off power mains at night, or quietly stopped buying tonics when neighbors grew ill. Survival came in small acts, whispered choices, instinctive caution. They learned to live with their lethal comforts, just as you learn to live with background hums of danger in your own world. Pollution, plastics, screens glowing late into the night. You pause in the corridor listening. The house quiets. The lights dim. The Edwardian family you've been shadowing drifts into bed, their trust in modernity intact, their survival not guaranteed. And you, standing here centuries later, finally exhale, realizing you've been holding your breath through their every gamble. Now the narrative softens, winding down, stretching long and gentle like a lullaby. The sharp edges of invention blur, the hiss of gas fades to a whisper, the glow of radium dissolves into nothing but the faintest shimmer. The pages of toxic books close themselves quietly on shelves, dust settling like snow. Imagine the house now at rest, stripped of its perils, a quiet shell of wood and brick where shadows stretch lazily across the floorboards. The air calms, the hums quiet, and the whispers of innovation fall silent. All that remains is the steady rhythm of life, families breathing in sleep, unaware of dangers, unaware of triumphs, simply human in their effort to endure. And you too can let go now. Let the images soften, let the dangers retreat. The hiss of gas becomes a slow breeze. The crackle of wires melts into a distant lull. Even the eerie glow of radium dims into nothing more than a dream light. Every danger shrinks to memory, and every Edwardian soul you've walked beside drifts toward peace. So you close the door on this house of marvels and hazards, step back into your own safe room, and listen instead to the calm present moment. The soft hum of your fan, the warmth of your blanket, the familiar rhythm of your own breath. The Edwardians lived, gambled, and often paid dearly. But you can simply close your eyes. Good night, traveler, sweet dreams.